We're pleased to have with us today as our guest speaker, Ms. Miriam J. Baer. Ms. Baer is the Executive Director of the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. A native of Lawrence, Kansas, Miriam graduated summa cum laude from the University of Kansas. She then attended the University of North Carolina Law School, receiving her JD degree in 1984. Following graduation from law school, Miriam joined a Raleigh law firm where she involved in private practice. In September 1987, she joined the staff of the North Carolina Real Estate Commission, where she served for many years as its legal counsel. In 2010, she was named the Commission's Executive Director. In addition to her management responsibilities as Chief of Staff, Miriam's duties involve oversight of the Commission's licensing, education, and regulatory functions. Please join me in welcoming Miriam Baer.
Hi, everybody. Good. So they asked me to do it around one or to stay if I want me to stay. So I'm from the Real Estate Commission. I don't want you to feel the pressure. But probably I can't get through my whole presentation in 15 minutes. So I'm going to plan to go till about 1:15, but I will not take it personally if you have appointments to get to and things to do, people to see. I get that. You schedule your time. It's valuable. So don't feel bad if you got to go. And I'm happy to take questions. Thank you. Yep. Along the way. And if they go too long, then I'll just move it along and then be here after for anybody who wants to hang out and talk to me about whatever. Okay, I have to do something slightly indecent now, so hold on. I'll face this way, just a second. Okay, good. Can you hear me now? Okay, super great. It's in there somewhere. So I'm here about hot topics, and I'm going to give you a little bit of graphic kind of data, not that kind of graphic. Let's call them just graphs, about what's happening with our numbers and kind of how I'm using that to predict where I think things are going in terms of how many real estate brokers are going to be in our world here in North Carolina. And then I'm going to talk about the things that get people in trouble the most often, or that have been coming up lately. And I'm happy to take questions as we go. I'll finish up with some of the projects that the Commission is currently working on, including trying to figure out how we're going to proceed with NAR. So that's at the very end, but I think you just heard some good advice here in terms of that, in terms of having, the fact that we have buyer agency agreements at all is huge, because there are a lot of places where people are having to learn how to have conversations, and you've already learned how to have those conversations. And I look through our world with rose-colored glasses and assume that every one of you have those conversations every time with your buyers when you meet them. Personally, I've always used an agent to buy and sell houses, even throughout my tenure as with the Real Estate Commission. Theoretically, I should know a lot about it and shouldn't need help, but actually, I think that most consumers, including myself, are very well served by having a broker to assist them in the transaction, even when they think that they know everything about it. So I'm confident that we all are going to be in industry and we're going to be professionals in this industry forever. I did live through the transition from the time when everybody was a seller sub-agent. So some of you weren't born then, probably, but back in the day, I started in 1987, and in 1987, everybody was a seller sub-agent. You drove people around in your car, you took them to see this property and that property. You weren't representing them. You were representing the seller as a sub-agent. You were with some different company, but you were on the seller side of the transaction. In the mid-90s, we shifted that bar, and first, we just had a few people who were being exclusive buyer agents, and then it took off, and then the big firms wanted to have the opportunity to assist both buyers and sellers. And then we ran into the whole dual agency problem, because when the big firms got into it, then inevitably a buyer with that firm would want to buy a house from a seller with that firm. And so we managed all that with designated dual agency and all of those rules, and I think we've gotten along pretty darn well. And that transition was hard, and people had to learn a whole new way of doing business, but we made it through, and if we have to learn another way of doing business, we'll make it through. It's just going to be another way. But that's one reason I have stayed at the Real Estate Commission since 1987. I came as a young lawyer. I remember talking to my dad about this job, and I was telling him what I was going to do as a lawyer for the commission, and it's one little set of statutes in a giant set of books about the law, and I was really concerned about how that was going to be for me. And it turns out that here in this business that we're all in, we touch contracts, we touch corporate law, partnership law, we touch agency law, we touch criminal law. I'll get to that, that's a fun part of my presentation. But you know, it's actually brokerage. Brokerage is part of the life of most American citizens. Owning a house is a big part of that. The things that come up in connection with that are important and matter and have a huge, broad reach. So I feel good about our future. It's just that we're just going to learn. My point was, getting to my point was that I have learned every day, I think, pretty much, in the job that I have, as probably all of you have. Every transaction is a little bit different. You have to learn something new every time. It keeps your brain engaged, it keeps you on your toes. Sometimes it's horrifying, or like, oh, I just don't, why am I doing this? But then you get to the end and the resolution of it, and you figure something new out, and it's fun. And so, you know, I just do think we're gonna all be fine. And now I'll get back on track, some numbers. This is total licensees from 2007 till 23. In 07, we really had an economic downturn, and whenever the economy changes, how many people are licensed and how many people want to be licensed changes. So the tall bars are people and the short bars are companies. But you can see we kind of made a happy face starting in 15, 16, and we've been on the rise ever since. But if you look at those last 2, 3 bars, I think we're evening out a little bit. We're hitting a plateau, and I think we're going to have kind of stable numbers for the near future. And we may have a downturn in numbers going forward. This is how our licensees break out. The vast majority, 83,000 and change, are active full brokers. When I started at the commission, that portion of the graph would have been salesmen or salespeople. But we changed the rules to require brokers to become full brokers within 18 months. Used to be 3 years, now it's 18 months. And so the percentage of brokers who are on that full status are much higher. And then the next little chunk at the bottom where it says 5,266, that is the active provisional brokers. So that's a moving little pie piece where people are moving into that and moving out of it pretty quickly. The next little 240, that's limited non-resident commercial licensees. Those are people who come into our state for 1 or 2 commercial transactions, and so it's a tiny number. And the rest of it is inactive people until you get to the top where it says 16,942. Those are firms. So we have a lot of firms, more and more firms, especially with the increase in teams. And if teams are LLCs, partnerships, anything like that, they need to have a license. This shows you our licensing per year. You can see a huge spike in COVID. First a decline before COVID because for a while there nobody was teaching. Everything was closed. We were all hunkered down in our houses, so we didn't issue a whole lot of licenses that year, and so we made up for it the next year. We've been issuing fewer licenses in 22 and 23, and 24 is going to look almost exactly like 23 according to my metrics. So we're at the sort of 17, 18 level in terms of people wanting to get into this business, and it seems to be hanging out there. Here's a part you care about. Complaints per year. We've been generally on the rise. As long as our numbers are rising, our complaints are going to rise. It's not about worse behavior or higher percentages of people being complained about. The percentage of people who are complained about is about the same. So those numbers pretty much track with numbers of licensees. All right, so let's talk about complaints. Yay. We have a staff of both in-house people called consumer protection officers and auditor investigators who go out in the field, and both those folks handle complaints that come in. The auditor investigators are the ones who travel and might come and knock on your door and want to see your trust account records or something like that. Everybody in here is a BIC, right? Yeah, okay. So they might want a personal visit. The commission does have the authority to audit on demand. We can just show up and say, hey, we want to see your books and records. Most often we don't do that. Usually we call and say we're coming, which gives you a little bit of chance to get ready for us. And that's actually easier for you and for us so that you can have your ducks lined up in a row and we can just get in there and see that your records are perfect and get out. That's always nice when that happens. Often it's not what happens. Often with trust account records we find problems, but very often those are more about accounting and record keeping and keeping up with the numbers than theft, for example. So the commission cares deeply about theft. If you're currently stealing the money, that's a huge, huge problem for you and for us. And when we find out about it, then the commission's going to want to take action. When it's about record keeping and not understanding your software, we're going to try to help and help you get it sorted so that you understand how to use it and we understand how much money's in there and what should be in there. And that is less concerning for us. It's still concerning, but way less. So letters of inquiry, we used to send you those brown envelopes. People, they used to be legendary, but now we are sort of in the modern times, and so instead we're sending emails. And so you should be sure to maintain your email with the commission at an address where we can find you, because one of the worst things that can happen is that we send you a complaint and you don't answer it, and we send you a reminder and you don't answer it. And then things escalate from there, and then we send people out to knock on your doors, and not answering is itself a violation. So keep your email address up to date. A little sidebar on that, you are allowed to have a personal private email address and or a public email address with us. You have to have one that we can see and communicate with you, but you can hide some of your email addresses from the world. The Real Estate Commission is a government agency, and there are lots of laws and rules about our records being open and available to the public. And so your email addresses are available to the public unless you make them private, and you can do that and then we won't make them available to the public. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a few complaint topics. Material facts, unauthorized access to the property, money, criminal convictions, and professionalism. I'll start with common misrepresentations of material facts. Here, I'm going to say if you don't ask me some questions, I'm going to feel like I'm just bombing. So please ask me some questions so we can have some dialogue here. Square footage is like a hot topic at my office. We have a commission member, Mel Black. Some of you might know Mel. He very much cares about square footage. And we have a lot of discussions about square footage cases. You don't have to advertise square footage if you don't want to, unless your MLS says you do. And if it does, then you need to be accurate when you put it up there. So you can do that in different ways. You can measure yourself, that's ideal. You could hire an appraiser to measure for you. We have a booklet that's online that gives you guidelines for how to measure correctly. But it is important that you be within about 5% of what a reasonable person would say. In general, when we get these cases, if you're less than 5% off, then we don't care. If you're 10% off, we might care, but it depends on how hard it is to measure that particular property. Some properties are really difficult. If you're more than 10% off, we're almost certainly going to care. Especially if you say it's 10% bigger than it actually is. If you say it's 10% smaller, that seems less bad, except it's worse for the seller because they've got something to market and you've under-marketed what they have. We also get lots of complaints about numbers of bedrooms. This is particularly the case when a property is served with septic or sewer isn't city. We get age of everything, the roof, the HVAC, the water heater, all of that. You have a general duty. Yes, Steve, thank you, Steve.
Mrs. Baer, I have a question.
Call me Miriam.
Thank you, Baer. Regarding number of bedrooms, and this scenario, this question,
Yeah.
it's on city sewer.
Okay, it's on city sewer.
So, can you speak to the nuances of era of build and style as far as how bedrooms can be reported? Because Victorian homes built in the early 20th century may not have closets.
So I think that you need to look to the building code in Asheville or Buncombe County or whatever county you're in to see if they have particular definitions. The commission isn't going to get into the weeds on that though, I can tell you that. So if it looks like a bedroom and acts like a bedroom and you call it a bedroom, fine. A window is, usually windows and closets are the key things. Does it have windows and closets? If it doesn't have either one, then it's not a bedroom. If it has one or the other, then it depends, and I think you have to use some judgment and discretion there. The safest thing is not to call it a bedroom and to call it a study, an office, bonus room, an extra, blah, blah, blah. That's the safest thing. So if you want to walk the straight, narrow, don't count it. Put it in the remarks, say you've got this extra thing. If it looks and walks and talks like a bedroom but it's missing one or the other, you might could count it. Victorian house, I had a house that was built in the 20s and it had a closet that was about this wide and about this deep. You couldn't put a hanger in it and close the door because it was built with like hooks back in the day. So I had to buy a wardrobe for that house. I love that house, but yeah, I get the closets problem. Yes, ma'am.
I must say that I came up against something that was unusual, and I approached the commission about it years ago. I had a buyer for a house that in Madison County on a septic. That wasn't the issue, it was the heated square footage. Do you remember?
No. No. But as soon as you say mountains and heated square footage and cabins and all of that, it comes up a lot.
Yeah.
These little places, they might not have a high enough ceiling, they might have sloped ceilings. You get into this thing where you got, is it about that or am I?
Kind of. So in the MLS, it stated that it had central air and obviously it had heat, right? So it was a house that had been built onto. So the front of the house had central air. The back of the house did not.
Mm-hmm.
The back of the house had monitor heating in the hallway and transom windows to the bedrooms, or transom, spaces to the bedrooms.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they call it all heated square footage.
Mhm.
Appraisers don't have any problem with it.
Mm-hmm. But I bet we did.
But, yes, and you cited on that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I bet we did, because I would go straight to our square footage guidelines, the yellow book, and it would tell me that if it doesn't have a heat source in that room itself, that it's, just relying on transom windows or something like that, we would say that is not heated square footage. You can add it on in the remarks and say there's also this other thing and it's heated this way, but it's not heated square footage. Yeah, and it can be. I mean, we had one case like that where basically you could stand in a square in the middle of some little tiny mountain cabin that was probably built for hunters back in the day to just have a place to sleep. And that was all that you could really count, because we look at the slope of the roof line. You have to have at least 7 feet. You could have a knee wall. And if you have a room with a knee wall, those little walls, and then it goes up. Once you get to 5 feet, you can count all the way to the top, so long as the top is at least 7 feet, and so long as the percentages or something, don't quote me. I mean, a bigger portion of it has to be inside those limits. All of this is spelled out. It's on the commission's website. You can look at it anytime. And you can call us anytime. Our numbers are going to be on the slide at the end. But I would say you can call us anytime and say, here's what I got. How should I deal with it? We would so much rather talk to you at the beginning when nothing has happened than at the end when you're trying to figure out what you should have done 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago. Yes, ma'am.
And I've had this conversation with the commission. You guys are awesome on the phone for anybody who hasn't picked up the phone. Back to square footage, you know, there are a lot of spaces in Asheville where you've got brick exposed walls and stained concrete. Is there any conversation about changing some of the guidelines for the more contemporary style?
Oh, but there should be.
Or what's the R value of a brick?
What's the what?
What's the R value of a brick?
Well, it's
Yeah.
the finishes more so. Because if you look at
Right.
the guidelines, it has to have finished flooring and finished walls.
So in that context, though, I think we would allow it.
Or you
The finished concrete floor and a brick wall, I think we would allow it. And I don't think anyone would get in trouble for including that in your square footage with us. I mean, you might make a note about it, but to me, that's kind of cool, modern, industrial feel to it. I wouldn't argue. Yes?
For full transparency, I have something I'm going to give you because I submitted it to the commission and I felt like I got going on. And here's what it is. 2 years ago, Baer client entered into an agreement, was told that stormwater drainage was compliant and that it didn't present any problem. Due diligence showed with the county that it was not compliant, and to this day, a CO cannot be issued for that standing home. So 26 months has gone by. Baer is into it for several $100,000. It is in litigation. The question is it a material fact when someone tells you a building permit, or should have told you a building permit was contingent upon him getting a CO, or CO contingent upon that building permit? Because it is clear from the county that there is a contingency on that building permit. You get no CO until you clear up the entire community's stormwater drainage issues.
So I would say yes, that's a material fact. Yes, that's a material fact. If you know this thing, this block that is going to prevent the usual course of business in a new construction property and you don't tell it, that would be a violation. And so that is like the first line when you think about misrepresentation of a material fact. Either you know something and you don't tell, so that's an omission of a material fact, that's a violation, or you lie. You say, oh, everything's fine, the permits are good, everything's approved, it's awesome, there's no problem, blah, blah, blah. That's also a misrepresentation. Either of those are actionable by the commission. So anything that's a violation of the law, ultimately, the question is not what I say, not what any of the lawyers on our staff say, it's what the commission members who are appointed to decide these things say. So there are violations and there are violations, and I don't know your particular case, and I'm happy to look at it again. Yeah, so yeah, I'll take it when I leave. But I will also say that sometimes the commission makes decisions that I don't agree with, one way or the other. And that can happen. Ultimately, they're the ultimate deciders. Of course, staff does some of this on its own. So when it's clearly just not anything, the staff will close it without pursuing it all the way up to the 9 members of the board. But when it gets to something where there is a violation shown, then the next question is, what should the discipline be? Should there be discipline at all? Do we even care? You have a duty to update your address within 10 days of moving, but you took 11. Oh my God, it's a violation. Take his license. No, we're not going to bother with stuff like that. That's the extreme end. But you know, there's a whole range of this stuff. And the commission has different priorities also at different times, depending on who the 9 of them are. So like right now, square footage is like on the top of the list. It didn't always sit on the top of the list. Sometimes somebody else had something that was on the top of the list. But that's a sort of roundabout answer to how things could happen the way that they do. Yes?
So on that note about square footage, and the appraisers not seeing eye to eye on how the commission, are you guys gonna get together?
No, we're not gonna get together. Appraisers and the real estate commission look at square footage differently, and you don't want us to adopt their view, and they won't adopt ours. Because their view has to do with below grade. So the biggest difference between us and the appraisers is that an appraiser has to separately count below grade square footage. And if any corner of any property is below the ground, any corner, any bit, then you can't count that as regular square footage if you're an appraiser. And the real estate commission just doesn't think that that's practical. I don't think that's practical. I don't want you to have to figure out what's below grade and what's not below grade. And so no, we're never gonna get together. But what it usually means is that you're advertising a bigger number if there's some below grade than an appraiser would. They will count it, they'll just count it separately. Yeah, I've got to keep going because otherwise we'll be here forever. Some other common misrepresentations is road projects, homeowner associations. Everybody loves to hate them, especially if there's assessments or some financial thing coming. The timing of that and what you know and what you don't know at the moment can cause problems for brokers. Underground fuel storage tanks. We had a case recently where there were two. The broker knew about one, disclosed the one, didn't disclose the other. So, you know, should they have known, shouldn't they have known? That's really how we analyze these things. They come in, something didn't get disclosed that should have been, but should the broker have been able to figure it out? Were there any red flags, anything that would have brought it to their attention? When there are two and you disclose one, it seems like the broker was trying to do their job. And if the other one was hidden, then they may not have been able to figure that out. Permits are a huge thing. We talked about this property over here where the addition was and it didn't have heat. There's a lot of unpermitted square footage in North Carolina, lots and lots and lots of it. And sometimes figuring that out is difficult. But that became a thing that the commission started to care about 5 years or so ago, especially as record keeping at your county municipal offices has gotten better. You can more easily find out than you used to be able to find out if something was permitted with the old Victorian house. Like maybe they added on that screen porch, you know, in 1904 and there's no records. The commission's not going to hold your feet to the fire. But when it happened last year and there's no permit and it's easy to go down to the office and check, then we're going to care. Here's the thing we're seeing a lot right now. And so I'm going to talk about it, and I have more words on my slide than I usually like to have. This is about just one property that gets listed. So this happens over and over again, my example is about a property that gets listed. There's a contract, there's a home inspection, the home inspection reveals defects. Buyer number one says, I don't want to buy this house with these defects, I'm walking. They lose their due diligence. They lose their earnest money deposit or not, depending on when they terminate, inside their due diligence period or outside. Now the listing agent knows something that they didn't know before. In the first transaction, they didn't know about these defects, but now they do. Now I have another buyer who comes. Listing agent doesn't change the MLS, doesn't change any advertising, doesn't make any disclosures. Buyer number two pays a due diligence fee and an earnest money deposit. Buyer number two has a home inspection. Buyer number two's home inspector finds the same defects or some similar pattern. Buyer number two walks away. And we see this now with like 3, 4, even 5 transactions before anybody kind of connects the dots and realizes that the listing agent has had this information in front of them for a long time and hasn't disclosed it. Often what happens is a broker calls the next broker and says, hey, did you know? Because they didn't tell me. Sometimes we find out about these things from other brokers. Sometimes the helpful neighbor comes over and tells. You know, you all have met that helpful neighbor. I know you have. Yeah. So what went and should the listing agent disclose? Listing agent has to disclose material facts as soon as they know them. And so once this becomes a thing, then they need to start changing the advertising and their disclosure, or at least do something to make sure that before we have contract number 2, that they know about the defect that came up in contract number 1. In time for buyer number 2 to make a reasonable decision about whether they want to proceed or not. I mean, just because there's a defect doesn't mean somebody doesn't want to buy it. They just need to know about it ahead of time and before they pay their non-refundable due diligence fee. So your duty to disclose is going to be anything that you reasonably can discover, including facts contained in an inspection report. Maybe we wouldn't have thought you should have known this thing in transaction number 1. Usually we don't. But in transaction number 2, you do. Sometimes the excuse is, I didn't want to know, so I didn't look at the inspection report. That will not fly. You know, it's like the guy who's had 2 years of unopened bank statements on his desk. This was a case of mine back when I was the lawyer. A guy had 2 years of unopened bank statements on his desk. And if he had just opened them, he would have seen that every month the bank balance was declining. Of course, this is back in the day when it was on paper and you didn't get it on your computer. He would have seen that his bookkeeper was gradually stealing the money. And he didn't find out until his bank called him because he was out. And that was because his bookkeeper slowly bled him dry. This is the same kind of thing. Once you have the inspection report, you should open it, you should look at it, you should see what it says, and then you should pass on the material information. Sometimes people want to argue with us about the fact that the home inspector says that this information, this report, is not for public consumption. It belongs to the person who paid for it. So you get into these ownership arguments about who owns the report. We don't tell you that you have to disclose the physical report. We tell you that you have to disclose the material facts inside the physical report, what you've learned from the report. You don't have to hand them a piece of paper or email that document to them. You just have to tell them what you learned that matters. Yes?
What's the position where I've been on the buyer's side and the seller's agent has said,
He asked me and I said, it doesn't matter.
where a seller has told their agent, I don't want to know, tell them not to send me the report, tell them not to tell me what's wrong with my house. I've encountered on the buyer's side several times with the seller like, I don't want to know.
So willful blindness, that's what we would call willful blindness, is not a defense. It's not. You all are grown-ups. This is a transaction where your job is part of your job is to protect the public, even when that hurts your particular client. Every time you disclose a material fact that you know or should know, you're arguably hurting your client if you're the listing agent.
Well,
but you still have to tell.
Well, no, if the listing agent knew, absolutely, but the listing agent basically saying, my seller instructed me to don't send us the reports. The listing agent never knows what the problems are either.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to fly.
I wouldn't think so. But
Yeah, I mean, I haven't had that case exactly, but I don't see that flying because you're licensed and there's an expectation that you're going to do what you can. Yes?
A twist to this is I'm not seeing, or maybe I'm aware of a secondary backup contract in place. The listing agent not conveying the material facts to those buyers and their agent in a timely manner so that they can decide if they still want to stay in the contract.
Interesting. Good to know. So they should. Obviously, they should. So if you didn't,
You're on the contract, here's our termination, you're on the.
it's sort of a forgetting about if you've got a backup is his question, and there's this other set of people and a lack of disclosure to the backup buyer about what you know, which you should do. All right, I'm going to hot-foot it along because I see people need to go, but I want to do a couple more things. One is about unauthorized access. This is about giving the buyer keys to a property or the code so that they can get in before you've closed. You should get at least written consent from your seller if you're going to do that. Sometimes people say that they just want to put a couple boxes in the garage, and the next thing you know, the moving van has moved up and it's all in there. And sometimes they say they just want to measure to see if their couch is going to fit against a particular wall, and the next thing you know, their furniture is all organized and arranged, and then they don't close. For whatever reason, they don't close. And then all their stuff is in there, and then you have this thing you have to deal with when all their stuff is in there. There is a buyer possession before closing addendum. Use that. That lays out everything, including getting rid of them if you have to. Here is the sex and drugs part. I really wanted to get to the sex and drugs part. So we're going to talk about sex and drugs. If you're too young for this, then please leave. We get a lot of complaints about brokers who are supposedly previewing or showing properties. We get a lot of these, a depressing number of these. And what they're actually doing is what is in this picture here. They're scoping out the medicine cabinet and the kitchen cabinets and maybe some other things. We had one case where a licensed broker in North Carolina went to between 6 and 8 properties every single day. Every single day. Maybe she took Sundays off, I don't know. Every single day otherwise. She never had a client or a customer with her. She was always previewing. So it turned out she was doing this. She was going through, and it went on until she got caught on a webcam. So I have now watched in my career many webcam videos. One of my favorites was a woman who was going into a kitchen cabinet, and she was pulling down all the drug bottles that were in the kitchen cabinet and looking at them and putting them back until she got to the one she wanted, and then she put it in her pocket. And then she keeps going, and then you see her see the camera. Like, and you see her whole expression just like, you know, that word that if you're too young, cover your ears. You see that whole thing go across her face, and then her hand goes into her pocket, and the drug bottle goes back onto the shelf. You know? So she doesn't have a license anymore. This is one of the easiest cases for an attorney in my office to prosecute. When I got that, and I'm the attorney, we are done. We are not letting brokers into people's houses to go through their stuff. We do have webcams a lot more. You have to be careful about webcams because if there's an expectation of privacy, which is often the case in a bathroom, you know, you don't expect to be on a webcam in a bathroom, but you can focus a webcam on the medicine cabinet. For you all, I would just say, advise your homeowner clients to secure their drugs, conceal them, whether they're legal or illegal, secure their drugs. Put them somewhere where people can't find them, can't get to them. Don't let people wander off when you're doing showings. Of course, people use the bathroom, of course they do, so that makes the bathroom one of the more vulnerable places. And of course you can't have a camera on the toilet, but you can on just the medicine cabinet. You have to be careful about recording. In North Carolina, you can't record conversations unless you're a party to them. That's a little not quite right, but close enough. So you shouldn't in your listings have audio recording, but you can have visual recording. And pay attention to any unusual activity in your listings. Yeah, before I leave this one, I have to tell one more story because I promised sex. So this is the sex part of this presentation. I did this presentation in Savannah, so if you were there, this is sort of a toned down version of it. But David asked me, I asked David if he was at my presentation in Savannah, and he said he couldn't remember, and I said, okay, then you weren't there because you would remember. So, unauthorized access, we also have problems with sex. We have problems with brokers who access properties for trysts with whoever. So, the latest one was a case that the commission considered whether to hold a hearing on a couple of weeks ago. It was at our before Savannah meeting, probably September or October. A listing agent had a listing. A buyer agent went into the service and said, I want to show this property at like 9 o'clock at night. The listing agent got a pop-up or some kind of message saying, Miriam wants to show your listing. The listing agent texted the buyer agent and said, don't show my listing. It's already under contract. I don't want any more people going in there. Don't go. The buyer agent went ahead and went. Technology being what it is and wherever she was, the listing agent got a pop-up message that said, buyer agents accessed your property that you have listed. She again texted the buyer agent and said, what the hell? Why are you in my property when I told you that it's under contract and that we don't want any more showings? Get out. The buyer agent didn't answer. The listing agent called the police. The police went. The police knocked on the door. The buyer agent opened the door. The buyer agent was wearing a see-through negligee. The buyer agent had a man with her and a bottle of whiskey. This is all written down by the police officer in his report, which is now in my files at the real estate commission. The listing, I didn't tell this in Savannah, but I'll tell you this little fact that shouldn't matter, but the listing agent was 72 years old. No, sorry, buyer agent. Buyer agent was 72 years old. And there's a part of me that says, you go, girl. I mean, really, it's just, however, I have to park that part somewhere because you go girl needs to go not in the listing of somebody else where she's not supposed to be. Okay, so none of you wants to have this file on my desk or any of the attorneys in my office's desk, right? One of my first cases was one where a guy took a woman to a listing and he kept showing the same listing like 50 times. And it was because he had a girlfriend that wasn't his wife that he was taking there, and you know, we can just guess what they might have been doing there. And they got caught by the neighbor who saw them doing what they were doing there. And at the beginning of my career, I was like, okay, you know, what is the appropriate sanction for this? And I didn't really think it was that bad. And my boss told me, it's that bad, it's bad. You know, I was 27 and I was like, oh, well, with age comes wisdom, I guess. But anyway, the commission views this as bad. It's an abuse of the seller's property. It should not happen. So I could stop here because I've really run late. But trust accounting, keep up with the money, criminal convictions. If you're convicted, if you're disciplined by another board, whether you're in I can go back if you're taking pictures. Although actually David has all this, so if you want it, you can have it. Criminal convictions. If you're disciplined by, say, the appraiser board, home inspectors board, state bar, we get a lot of disbarred attorneys. My former boss used to say, why is it that the last person a disbarred attorney does, the last thing a disbarred attorney does before he slits his wrist is come to the real estate commission and see if he can get a license? It's like, you still have that, if you got disbarred because you stole the money there, why do you think that the real estate commission is going to give you access to the money here? Or not. Okay, I'm going to leave you with professionalism. I'm going to skip all the topics that are coming up, but you saw that we got like 1,500 complaints in a year. Do you know how many of those 1,500 complaints in a year wouldn't have come if these things had been kind of top of mind with the broker? Self-control, forbearance, endurance, patience, tolerance, all those things. I mean, some of you have heard me speak before, and I almost always have some version of this in my talk. And so you've heard me say this before. Every single one of us has had to deal in life with that person who pushes every single button, that person who makes you want to say all the bad words you know and wish that you could swear in multiple languages, right? There's that person. The worst thing you can do is to lose your patience, to get into it with that person, to have a contest with that person. Patience, tolerance, endurance, forbearance. Take a deep breath, smile. You know, when you smile, even when you don't mean it, when you smile, these little endorphins go off in your body and make you feel better. So just do it anyway. You can fire your clients. You can say to them, look, this doesn't seem to be working out. You're not happy, I'm not happy. Why don't we just agree to separate? You know, it's the kind of thing we spouses sometimes have to say to each other, and it's hard, but this is a business transaction. It's just a business transaction. And nobody should have to feel that bad in a business transaction. Yes?
Can you fire your client if you're under contract on something?
Well, so you have made a legally binding agreement with that person. So technically, no. But in point of fact, usually, when you're like this with each other, you just agree that you're going to terminate your contract. So legally, what you should do is not just say, hey, you're fired, like, you know, like TV shows. You should say, how about we split and agree not to pursue this contract anymore. You can also try to handle, you all are BICs, you probably have to deal with this inside your firms all the time. Like maybe it's time to assign a different person. The contract isn't with the individual broker. Like, if I work for you and I sign the listing agreement, that listing agreement is with your firm, not with Miriam Baer. So as BICs, you can easily, I mean it's hard, but legally easily, just assign it to somebody else and say, Miriam, you might want to step back from this. You can still pay me a referral fee or a portion of the commission and tell me to step back and put somebody in who can handle it to the end, to resolve some of this bitterness and unhappiness that's going on. And that's often the easiest way to handle it. But it's also possible to completely sever your listing contract or your buyer agency agreement. You should definitely do that with consent. Okay, I'm going to end here. I'm going to stay for questions. Thank you all for your patience and forbearance and endurance and being polite while I went on and on. I appreciate it.
Thank you all for taking time to come out today. Appreciate having you here. And one last thing, remember in North Carolina, you're not supposed to do audio recording without consent. When I would certainly act like some fellows either don't know the law or don't care about the law, but I'm going to ask. Be careful what I say. So, thank you all. Appreciate it.